Have you ever had someone mock the most precious thing you own right in front of a crowd? That is exactly what happened to me at my daughter's wedding, and it changed everything. I stood in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by 300 guests in their finest attire. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting dancing lights across the marble floor. The air buzzed with laughter and champagne toasts. My daughter Emily looked radiant in her white gown, her blonde hair swept up just like her mother used to wear it. But my focus was on the small velvet box in my jacket pocket. Inside that box was my late wife Margaret's diamond necklace. She wore it on our wedding day 35 years ago. She wore it to every anniversary dinner. When she died 10 years back from breast cancer, she held my hand and whispered, "Give this to Emily when she finds her love." I had waited a decade for this moment. I cleared my throat and tapped my champagne glass. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward me at the head table. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed forward. "Tonight we celebrate Emily and Trevor," I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "My daughter has been my pride and joy since the day she was born." I pulled out the velvet box and opened it. The diamonds caught the light like captured stars. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This necklace belonged to Emily's mother, Margaret. She wanted Emily to have it on her wedding day. Her love continues through this gift. I stepped toward Emily, extending the necklace. Her eyes widened, but she did not reach for it. Instead, Trevor, my new son-in-law, leaned forward from his seat. His lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach turn. "What is this, Henry?" he said loudly, his voice cutting through the reverent silence. "Did you pick this up at some pawn shop on 42nd Street? Nervous laughter scattered through the guests. I stood frozen. The necklace dangling from my fingers. Trevor waved his hand dismissively, and his knuckles knocked the velvet box right out of my other hand. It tumbled onto the white tablecloth with a dull thud. The necklace spilled out, its diamonds glittering against the fabric like tears. "Really, Henry," Trevor continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "You could have at least bought something new. Something with a proper certificate. This looks like costume jewelry." The laughter grew bolder. I felt heat rising up my neck, but it was not shame. It was rage, cold and precise. I looked at Emily. Waiting for her to speak, to defend her mother's memory, to defend me. She stared down at her plate, her fingers twisting the corner of her white napkin. She said nothing. The silence from my own daughter cut deeper than Trevor's words ever could. I had planned to announce my second gift right after presenting the necklace. A penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, 73rd and Park Avenue. $4.5 million, purchased outright, ready for them to move in. The deed was in my briefcase under the table. But Trevor's sneering face and Emily's cowardice changed everything in that moment. I straightened my spine and forced a calm smile. "Enjoy your evening," I said quietly. My voice betrayed nothing of the storm building inside me. I turned away from the head table, ignoring the pitying glances and whispered conversations trailing behind me like smoke. My shoes echoed on the marble floor as I crossed that enormous ballroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. I pushed through the double doors into the cool Manhattan night. The sounds of the wedding faded behind me. In my town car, I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the glittering city. Beyond the windshield, Trevor had humiliated me in front of 300 people. Worse, he had disrespected Margaret's memory. And Emily, my little girl, had let it happen without saying a single word. The deed to that apartment stayed in my briefcase. Trevor thought he had one. He thought I was just a sentimental old man with cheap trinkets. But he had awakened something dark and deliberate inside me, something that knew exactly how to fight back. Trevor Cunningham had no idea who he was dealing with. I had spent 40 years on Wall Street. I knew how to build empires. And I knew how to destroy them. Justice would be mine, and it would be absolutely crushing. The drive from Midtown Manhattan to my Brooklyn brownstone usually takes 30 minutes. But that night it felt like hours. I sat in the back of the town car, watching the city blur past through tinted windows. Neon signs flickered in Times Square. Yellow cabs honked and swerved. Tourists crowded the sidewalks, laughing and taking pictures. The world kept moving like nothing had happened, but my world had just shattered. My driver, Carlos, knew better than to make small talk. He had worked for me for 15 years. He sensed my mood and kept quiet. We passed by PS 47, the elementary school where I used to walk Emily every morning after Margaret died. I remembered her small hand gripping mine, her pink backpack bouncing with each step. She would chatter about her friends, her teachers, her dreams. Back then, I was her hero. What happened to that little girl? The brownstone stood quiet on its tree-lined street in Brooklyn Heights. It had been in my family for 50 years. Margaret and I raised Emily here. The front steps still had the crack from when Emily crashed her bicycle at age 8. I helped her inside, cleaned her scraped knee, and she hugged me tight. "You always fix everything, Daddy," she had said. I climbed those same steps. Now, each one creaking under my weight. Inside, the house felt too big, too empty. The floorboards groaned. The old radiator hissed. Framed photos lined the hallway, frozen moments of a happier time. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and sank into Margaret's favorite leather armchair. It still held the faint impression of her shape. I used to find her here every evening, curled up with a book and a cup of tea. On the side table was a drawer I had not opened in years. I pulled it open slowly. Inside was a stack of cards and letters Emily had written me as a child. I picked up the top one, a Father's Day card from when she was 10 years old. The construction paper was faded, the glitter mostly fallen off. "You are my hero, Daddy," she had written in uneven letters decorated with crayon hearts. "I will always love you." I traced those words with my finger. The little girl who wrote this would never have stayed silent while someone mocked her father. She would never have let anyone disrespect her mother's memory. Where did I lose her? Was it when she went to Columbia University? Was it when she met Trevor at that charity gala 3 years ago? Or had I been so focused on providing for her that I missed the moment she stopped needing me? Worse, a darker question crept into my mind. Was Trevor controlling her, manipulating her into silence? Or had Emily truly become someone who valued wealth and status over loyalty and love? I had to know the truth, because the answer would determine everything that came next. Let me tell you what it costs to raise a daughter alone in New York City after your wife dies. It costs everything. I opened the old photo album on my coffee table, the leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. Each page was a reminder of what I had given, what I had sacrificed, and how little it seemed to matter now. The first photo showed Emily at 6 years old, her hand in mine as we walked to her first day of school. Margaret had been gone for 3 months. Emily cried every morning, begging for her mommy. I took a leave of absence from my Wall Street firm, sleeping on her bedroom floor until she felt safe enough to sleep alone. I lost a major promotion because of those missed weeks, but my daughter needed me. I worked 80-hour weeks to pay for her private school education. Brooklyn Friends Academy cost $35,000 a year back then. I skipped lunches, wore the same 3 suits for 5 years, and drove a 15-year-old car. But Emily got the best education money could buy. When she was 10, I found a new investment opportunity that could have made me a fortune. But it required moving to Singapore for 2 years. I turned it down because Emily needed stability. Needed her home, needed her father present. I never told her about that choice. At 16, Emily wanted to study violin. Private lessons cost $200 an hour. I sold Margaret's car. The last piece of her I had besides the necklace. Emily played beautifully at her recital. She never knew what I gave up to make it happen. Columbia University tuition ran $60,000 a year. I liquidated a quarter of my retirement investments to cover it when her scholarships fell short. I told her not to worry, that I had it handled. She never asked what it cost me. Then came her graduation. I was scheduled to attend, front row seat reserved. But 2 days before, I had emergency triple bypass surgery. My heart, weakened from years of stress and 70-hour work weeks, finally gave out. I called Emily from the hospital bed, my voice weak, asking her to visit after the ceremony. She never came. She said she was celebrating with friends. That she would visit next week. Next week never happened. That was 4 years ago, right before she met Trevor Cunningham at a Manhattan charity gala. He was 32, ambitious. Working for a major investment bank. He wore $1,000 suits and drove a Porsche. Emily was dazzled. The phone calls home became shorter. Every month, then every few months. I love you, Dad. But I have to run. Trevor and I have dinner plans. Trevor and I are going to the Hamptons. Trevor says I should focus on building our future. I invited them both to Sunday dinners. Trevor always had excuses. Too busy, too tired, prior commitments. Emily stopped coming too. Last year, I overheard her at a restaurant. I had gone to meet a client and saw her at a corner table. With Trevor's friends. One of them asked about her family. My dad is comfortable, she said with a slight laugh. He did okay for himself, but nothing like Trevor's circle. She rewrote our history to fit into Trevor's world of new money and shallow values. That hurt worse than tonight's insult, because it meant she had been ashamed of me long before Trevor mocked that necklace. I closed the album and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. I had given this girl everything, sacrificed my health, my wealth, my future. And for what? To be humiliated in front of strangers while she sat silent. No more. Trevor wanted to play games. I invented the game he was trying to play. And Emily needed to learn that silence has consequences. By Monday morning, my grief had turned into something much more dangerous. Clarity. I sat in my office on the 42nd floor of a building on Wall Street. Technically, I had retired 3 years ago. But I still consulted for a few firms. The view stretched across lower Manhattan, the morning sun glinting off glass towers. This city had been my battlefield for 4 decades. I knew every player. Every move, every weakness. Trevor Cunningham had made a fatal mistake. He thought I was just a sentimental old man with outdated values and cheap jewelry. He had no idea what I was capable of. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 2 years. Jack Morrison answered on the second ring. His voice was gruff, weathered by age and too many cigars. Jack, I said. I need a favor. Henry Wilson, he chuckled. I was wondering when you would call. Heard about the wedding. Word travels fast in our circles. That stung, but I pushed forward. I need everything on. Trevor Cunningham. Every deal he has touched, every investor he has courted, every debt he owes. I want his entire financial life mapped out. There was a pause. Jack knew me well enough to understand what this meant. Henry, he said slowly, if you go down this road, there is no turning back. You sure about this? I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Margaret and Emily at the beach. Both laughing, their hair tangled with salt and sunshine. Trevor had disrespected Margaret's memory in front of 300 people. Emily had let him. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Give me 72 hours, Jack replied. I will have a full report. Next, I called a private investigator named Carl Jensen. We had worked together years ago on a corporate fraud case. He was thorough, discreet, and had no problem digging into places most people would not touch. Carl, I need surveillance on Trevor Cunningham. Where he goes, who he meets, what he spends. I want photographs, receipts, everything. How deep do you want me to go? Carl asked. As deep as it takes, I said. I want to know every secret he is hiding. Over the next 3 days. Documents began arriving. Financial statements with red flags. Emails between Trevor and colleagues showing risky investments. Bank records revealing cash withdrawals that did not match his salary. But what Jack found on the third day made my blood run cold. Trevor was not just arrogant and cruel. He was desperate, drowning in debt, and betting everything on deals that could collapse at any moment. And my daughter had no idea she had married a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Worse, I discovered exactly how Trevor planned to save himself. He was counting on my money. On that penthouse, on using Emily as his lifeline to my fortune. Trevor Cunningham thought he could use my daughter as collateral. He was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a father's love and a Wall Street veteran's ruthlessness. By Monday morning, my grief had turned into something much more dangerous. Clarity. I sat in my office on the 42nd floor of a building on Wall Street. Technically, I had retired 3 years ago, but I still consulted for a few firms. The view stretched across lower Manhattan, the morning sun glinting off glass towers. This city had been my battlefield for 4 decades. I knew every player, every move, every weakness. Trevor Cunningham had made a fatal mistake. He thought I was just a sentimental old man with outdated values and cheap jewelry. He had no idea what I was capable of. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 2 years. Jack Morrison answered on the second ring. His voice was gruff, weathered by age and too many cigars. Jack, I said. I need a favor. Henry Wilson, he chuckled. I was wondering when you would call. Heard about the wedding. Word travels fast. In our circles. That stung, but I pushed forward. I need everything on Trevor Cunningham. Every deal he has touched, every investor he has courted, every debt he owes. I want his entire financial life mapped out. There was a pause. Jack knew me well enough to understand what this meant. Henry, he said slowly, if you go down this road, there is no turning back. You sure about this? I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Margaret and Emily at the beach, both laughing, their hair tangled with salt and sunshine. Trevor had disrespected Margaret's memory in front of 300 people. Emily had let him. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Give me 72 hours, Jack replied. I will have a full report. Next, I called a private investigator named Carl Jensen. We had worked together years ago on a corporate fraud case. He was thorough, discreet, and had no problem digging into places most people would not touch. Carl. I need surveillance on Trevor Cunningham. Where he goes, who he meets, what he spends. I want photographs, receipts, everything. How deep do you want me to go? Carl asked. As deep as it takes. I said. I want to know every secret he is hiding. Over the next 3 days, documents began arriving. Financial statements with red flags. Emails between Trevor and colleagues showing risky investments. Bank records revealing cash withdrawals that did not match his salary. But what Jack found on the third day made my blood run cold. Trevor was not just arrogant and cruel. He was desperate, drowning in debt, and betting everything on deals that could collapse at any moment. And my daughter had no idea she had married a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Worse. I discovered exactly how Trevor planned to save himself. He was counting on my money, on that penthouse, on using Emily as his lifeline to my fortune. Trevor Cunningham thought he could use my daughter as collateral. He was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a father's love and a Wall Street veteran's ruthlessness. The cafe on the Lower East Side was the kind of place where people minded their own business. Chipped mugs, steamed-up windows, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with cigarette smoke from the alley outside. Perfect for a meeting you did not want anyone to know about. Carl Jensen sat across from me in a corner booth, sliding a thick manila folder across the scratched table. His fingers were stained yellow from nicotine, his eyes tired but sharp. "You wanted dirt on Cunningham," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Here it is. And Henry, it is worse than you thought." I opened the folder. The first document was a credit report. My stomach dropped. Trevor Cunningham owed $780,000 in gambling debts. Underground poker games in Newark and Atlantic City. High-stakes blackjack tables where they did not ask questions as long as your cash was good. "He has been losing for 18 months, Carl said, tapping a page with his thick finger. "He is into some serious people. The kind who do not forgive late payments." I flipped to the next section. Bank statements showed Trevor withdrawing $50,000 at a time from accounts that should have been client investment funds. He was using other people's money to cover his gambling losses. "Does his firm know?" I asked. "Not yet," Carl replied. "But they will. He has been cooking the books, hiding losses, inflating returns on paper. One audit and he is finished." Then came the emails. My hand started shaking as I read Trevor's message to a loan shark dated 3 weeks before the wedding. "I will have collateral soon. My father-in-law is giving us a property worth over $4 million. I can use it to secure the loan and buy myself time." He had planned to take my gift, my penthouse, and gamble it away to pay off criminals. But the next document hit even harder. A medical record that Carl had obtained through channels I did not ask about. Emily Cunningham, 8 weeks pregnant. First prenatal appointment scheduled for next month. My daughter was carrying my grandchild, and she had no idea her husband was about to destroy their lives. In one photo, 2 large men in leather jackets stood behind him, their expressions making it clear this was not a friendly game. I closed the folder, my jaw tight. Trevor was not just arrogant. He was drowning, and he planned to drag Emily down with him. Worse, my grandchild, an innocent life, would be born into this house of cards. "How long does he have before it collapses?" I asked Carl. 2 months, maybe 3, Carl said. "His firm is starting to ask questions. His creditors are getting impatient. And if he does not come up with cash soon, those men in the photos will come collecting." I sat back, processing everything. Part of me wanted to protect Emily, to warn her, to pull her out of this disaster. But she had made her choice. She had chosen Trevor over me. Chosen his lies over my love. My grandchild would be born into Trevor's mess unless I tore it down first. Not out of revenge now, but out of protection. That baby deserved better than a father who gambled away futures and a mother too blind to see the truth. Trevor Cunningham was going to fall, and he was going to fall hard. 40 years on Wall Street taught me one critical lesson. You do not destroy a man with violence or threats. You destroy him with information, delivered to the right people at exactly the right time. Back in my office, I spread Carl's folder across my desk. Like a general planning a campaign. I had the intelligence. Now I needed the strategy. Trevor's firm, Cunningham and Associates, had 3 major investors keeping him afloat. Richard Ellison, a 62-year-old hedge fund manager I had known since the 1980s. Patricia Chen, who ran a family trust worth $200 million. And David Brewster, an old money type who valued reputation above profit. I had done business with all 3. More importantly, I had done them favors over the years. A good stock tip here, an introduction there, advice that saved them from bad investments. In our world, favors were currency, and I was about to cash in. I spent the next 6 hours preparing a dossier. Not the raw evidence from Carl, but a refined document. Financial charts showing Trevor's pattern of losses. Highlighted emails proving misuse of client funds. Bank records demonstrating the unauthorized withdrawals. Everything clean, professional. Impossible to dismiss. I removed anything that showed my involvement. This had to look like it came from a concerned insider, not a vengeful father-in-law. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had drafted an anonymous email. The attached dossier was labeled Confidential Review of Trevor Cunningham Financial Irregularities. The recipient list included Trevor's board of directors, his 3 major investors, and the compliance department of his firm. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. I looked at the photo on my desk. Emily at her college graduation, smiling wide, holding her diploma. I had been in a hospital bed recovering from heart surgery, but I had sent her flowers and a card. She never acknowledged either. She chose him. I thought. She stood silent while he mocked her mother's memory. This is not cruelty. This is consequences. I thought about my unborn grandchild. That baby deserved a father with integrity. Not a gambling addict buried in debt. If Trevor stayed in power, he would destroy them all. This was not just revenge anymore. This was protection. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital void, an invisible missile launching toward its target. No explosion, no drama, just ones and zeros traveling through fiber optic cables across Manhattan. I closed my laptop with a soft click and poured myself a drink. By tomorrow morning, Trevor's bosses would be reading that dossier. By tomorrow afternoon, the questions would start. By tomorrow evening, his world would begin to crumble. And Trevor Cunningham had no idea the avalanche was already sliding down the mountain toward him. Have you ever sat across from someone and watched them realize they are losing control? That was Trevor Cunningham 3 nights after I sent that email. The restaurant on the Upper West Side was one of those old Manhattan establishments with white tablecloths, dim lighting, and waiters who had worked there for 30 years. Emily had suggested this family dinner to smooth things over after the wedding. She still believed we could all just get along. Trevor arrived. 15 minutes late, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He barely looked at me as he sat down, immediately ordering a scotch. Make it a double, he told the waiter. Emily touched his arm. Rough day? She asked softly. Trevor pulled away, his eyes scanning the restaurant like he expected someone to jump out at him. You could say that, he muttered. I sipped my water, watching him carefully. The dossier had been circulating for 72 hours. Jack had confirmed that morning that Trevor's board had called an emergency review meeting. The walls were closing in, and Trevor could feel it. So Henry, Trevor said, his voice carrying an edge. You have been awfully quiet since the wedding. Not meddling in things that do not concern you. I hope. The accusation hung in the air. Emily's eyes widened. Trevor, Please, she said. We are just having dinner. I am just here for a meal, I replied calmly, cutting my steak. But my tone must have betrayed something because Trevor leaned forward, his knuckles white around his glass. Funny thing, he said. 3 of my investors suddenly have questions about my financial management. All at the same time. You would not know anything about that, would you? I met his gaze without flinching. Sounds like you should have better answers for your investors. Trevor's face flushed red. He slammed his glass down hard enough that nearby diners turned to look. You vindictive old man, he hissed. You have been digging into my business. Emily reached for his hand. Trevor, stop. My dad would not do that. Would he not? Trevor snapped at her. Your father has connections all over this city. He is sabotaging me because his feelings got hurt over some old necklace. That old necklace, I said quietly, my voice steady as steel, was your wife's mother's dying wish. And you called it junk from a pawn shop in front of 300 people. Emily's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, a protective gesture she probably did not even realize she was making. But I noticed. I had read the medical report. I knew about the pregnancy even if Trevor did not. Yet. Dad, please, Emily said, her voice strained. Trevor is under a lot of pressure at work. Can we just have a nice dinner? I set down my knife and fork, the silverware clicking against the plate. Pressure reveals character, Emily. I have seen all I need to see. Trevor stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. You think you are so superior with your old money ethics and your Brooklyn values. But you are just bitter that your daughter chose a real man over some washed-up has-been. The restaurant went silent. Every eye was on our table. I stood slowly, straightening my jacket. I left $300 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal and a generous tip. Enjoy your evening, I said. Both of you. I walked out with my head high. But I could hear Trevor's voice behind me, sharp and cruel as he turned on Emily. Your father is trying to ruin us. If you had any backbone, you would have shut him down years ago. Her soft reply was almost inaudible. How can he ruin you if you have done nothing wrong? Trevor's silence told me everything. Emily was finally starting to ask the right questions. But the real storm was just beginning. They say a house of cards can stand for years until one wrong breath brings it all down. For Trevor Cunningham, that breath came on a Thursday morning at 9:15. Trevor sat in his corner office on the 38th floor, surrounded by glass walls that usually made him feel powerful. Today, they felt like a cage. His assistant had called in sick. His phone kept buzzing with messages he did not want to read. And his boss, Walter Harrove, had summoned him to the executive conference room immediately. Harrove was a gray-haired titan who had run the firm for 23 years. He did not waste time on pleasantries. When Trevor entered the conference room, 3 board members sat alongside Harrove, their faces carved from stone. A stack of papers sat in the center of the mahogany table. Trevor recognized the charts, the highlighted emails, the bank statements. His dossier. Sit down, Cunningham, Harrove said. His voice was cold, final. Trevor's hands shook as he pulled out a chair. This is a misunderstanding, he started. Someone is trying to frame me. Harrove slid the papers across the table. These are your account numbers. Your signatures. Your emails authorizing transfers of client funds into personal accounts. Explain. Trevor's usual charm, the smooth talk that had gotten him through every tight spot, failed him. His mouth opened. But no convincing words came out. Those were temporary loans, he stammered. I always paid them back. Without authorization, one board member said sharply. Without disclosure. That is embezzlement. And what about these gambling losses? Harrove continued, pulling out photographs from the Hoboken casino. $780,000 in debt to organizations we cannot even verify. Are legal? Trevor's face drained of color. Where did you get those? We received an anonymous tip, Harrove said. But we verified everything independently. It is all accurate, is it not? The room spun. Trevor gripped the edge of the table. You do not understand the pressure I was under, he said desperately. I had wedding expenses, a lifestyle to maintain. I was going to fix everything. Harrove stood, buttoning his suit jacket with finality. Trevor Cunningham, effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Security will escort you out. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items. Any company property stays here. You cannot do this, Trevor shouted, standing so fast his chair fell backward. I built accounts worth millions for this firm. You built them with lies, Harrove said. And now those clients will be reassigned to people with integrity. We are done here. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Trevor looked around the table, searching for sympathy, for allies. He found none. These men he had schmozzed with at golf clubs and charity dinners now looked at him like he was toxic waste. The walk to his office was a perp walk. Colleagues stared from their cubicles, whispering. Trevor threw his diplomas, his awards, his personal photos into a cardboard box. His hands shook so badly he dropped a frame. It shattered on the floor. In the elevator down, Trevor pulled out his phone and called Richard Ellison, his biggest investor. Richard, we need to talk, he said, his voice cracking. Ellison's reply was crisp. My lawyers are already drawing up withdrawal papers. We are pulling every dollar, Trevor. Do not contact me again. The line went dead. Trevor called Patricia Chin. Same result. David Brewster would not even answer. By the time Trevor reached his Upper East Side apartment, he was unraveling. Emily was in the kitchen making tea when he burst through the door. He threw his cardboard box across the room, his diplomas scattering across the marble floor. They fired me, he shouted. Your father destroyed me. He sent them lies, sabotaged everything I built. Emily set down her teacup slowly, her face pale. Dad would not do that unless you gave him a reason. Trevor rounded on her, his eyes wild. Whose side are you on? The truth's side. Emily said quietly. How could he sabotage you if you did nothing wrong? Trevor's silence was deafening, and in that moment, Emily finally saw her husband clearly for the first time. Sometimes the worst news arrives in a plain white envelope delivered by a stranger who has no idea they are handing you the end of your world. 2 days after Trevor's firing, Emily answered the door of their apartment. A courier in a brown uniform handed her a thick envelope with a wax seal. She signed for it without thinking, her mind still spinning from Trevor's meltdown and his accusations about her father. She tore open the envelope. Inside was a legal document on heavy cream-colored paper, notarized and official. Her hand started shaking as she read the header. Notice of property sale and charitable donation. The Upper East Side penthouse at 73rd and Park Avenue, the one she had dreamed about, the one Trevor had told their friends was a done deal, had been sold. $4.5 million. But the money had not gone to them. Proceeds donated in full to the Margaret Wilson Foundation for Women's Shelters and Support Services. Emily sank onto the white couch, the paper trembling in her hands. Her father had sold their future and given it away. The foundation was named after her mother, the woman whose necklace Emily had. Let Trevor mock without saying a word. She read the document 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood. But there was no mistake. Her father's signature was bold and clear at the bottom. Trevor was out, desperately trying to meet with former clients who would not return his calls. Emily was alone in the apartment surrounded by luxury they could no longer afford. The rent here was $11,000 a month. Trevor's severance would last maybe 3 months. She grabbed her phone and called her father. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. His voice, calm and professional, asked her to leave a message. "Dad, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you are angry. I know I should have defended you at the wedding. But please call me back. We need to talk. I am pregnant, Dad. 8 weeks. And we have nothing left. Trevor lost everything, and now this. Please do not shut me out." She hung up, tears streaming down her face. Across Brooklyn, in his quiet brownstone, Henry listened to the voicemail 3 times. His hand trembled as he held the phone. Pregnant. He was going to be a grandfather. The rage he had felt at the wedding softened for a moment, replaced by something more complicated. His daughter was carrying his grandchild, and she was drowning. But then he remembered her silence. Remembered 10 years of distance. Remembered her letting Trevor disrespect Margaret's memory without saying a single word. He forwarded the voicemail to his lawyer with a simple note. Add Emily as an emergency beneficiary to the foundation. If she truly needs help, the foundation can provide shelter and support. But I will not enable Trevor's damage any further. He deleted the voicemail and set down his phone. His daughter was learning that choices have consequences, and sometimes those lessons come when you can least afford them. The doorbell rang at 7:30 on a cold Friday evening. I was in my armchair reading the newspaper when the sound cut through the quiet house like a knife. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Some part of me had been expecting this moment since I sent that legal document. Trevor and Emily stood on my Brooklyn stoop under the glow of the porch light. They looked like refugees from a life that had collapsed. Trevor's expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie missing. His hair, usually perfectly styled, stuck up in odd directions. Emily wore jeans and an old sweater I recognized from her college years. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Henry," Trevor started, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word, letting them into the house where I had raised Emily. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they shuffled into the living room. The contrast was stark. My modest brownstone with its worn furniture and faded rugs versus the marble and crystal world they had been living in. I gestured toward the couch, but they remained standing, shifting like cornered animals. "We have lost everything," Trevor said, trying to force some strength into his voice. "The job. The apartment, our savings. You have connections, Henry. You have the means. Help us get back on our feet. Please." There was still a trace of entitlement in his words, as if I owed him salvation. After everything he had done. I leaned against my armchair, arms crossed, saying nothing. Emily stepped forward, her hands shaking. She reached into her purse and pulled out the velvet box. Inside was Margaret's necklace, the one Trevor had knocked onto the table at the wedding. She had kept it after all. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I should have stood up for you. At the wedding. I should have defended Mom's memory. I was wrong, and I have been wrong about so many things." She sank to her knees on the old rug, the same rug where she used to play with her dolls as a little girl. Tears streamed down her face. "Please do not turn us away. I am pregnant, Dad. 8 weeks. Your grandchild." Her sobs echoed through the room, each one cutting into me like glass. I saw the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. I saw the teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I saw my daughter, broken and desperate. But I also saw the woman who had rewritten our history to impress Trevor's friends. Who had ignored my hospital stay. Who had stood silent while her husband mocked her mother's dying gift. You made your choices, I said quietly. Both of you did. Trevor mocked what mattered most to me. You, Emily, stood by and let him. You chose his world over our family. Trevor's face twisted with anger. You self-righteous old fool, he spat. You destroyed my career over hurt feelings. You ruined us. I turned to him, my voice cold as winter steel. No, Trevor. You destroyed yourself with gambling debts and embezzlement. You ruined my daughter by lying to her for a year. I just stopped you from taking her down any further. Emily looked up at Trevor, shock on her face. Gambling debts? What is he talking about? Trevor's silence confirmed everything. I walked to the door and opened it. The November wind rushed in, cold and sharp. Leave, I said. Both of you. Dad, please. Emily begged, still on her knees. The baby. That baby deserves better than a father who gambles away futures and